Past the blaring light of the hallway, I could only see her silhouette. "There's a monster in the closet," she said. My wife was more awake than me. She started to get out of bed. "No," my daughter said. "You don't go, Mummy. Daddy is braver." "Peter, you hear that? Apparently you're braver," my wife mumbled as she slid back into the covers. "I am," I said. The girl took after her mother with the overactive imagination. This wasn't the first time our daughter had woken us up in the middle of the night with abstract fears, and I feared it wouldn't be the last. As I dug my slippers out from beneath the bed, I convinced myself that with a bit of rational thinking, I could put an end to these 2 a.m. wake-ups. "It's the squiggle again," she whispered, dangling her legs from the bed. The squiggle was just another in a long list of creatures that would hide in my daughter's closet. There were goblins, there were bears, and after a fumbled explanation of world politics, Osama bin Laden shared the closet space for about a month. That night, it was the squiggle. She kept on looking at the closet door, expecting me to open it like I always did. But I didn't. Instead, I sat down next to her on the bed. "Can you describe the squiggle to me, Annie?" I said. She looked back at the closet as if she was asking it for permission to speak. "It doesn't feel real," she finally whispered. "Well, Annie, that's because it's like spaghetti, but with eyes, and it's on fire." Her eyes were filling up with tears again. "It doesn't feel real. It's like a drawing that no one should ever draw. It doesn't feel real." "Annie, have you ever considered the squiggle doesn't feel real because it isn't actually real?" "What does consider mean?" she asked, wiping her tears. "It's when you think about something really hard. It's when you think about something you thought was true, but you think about it really hard and you realize it's not true." The thoughts of the closet drifted from her face. She was no longer a scared child. She was a young mind trying to make sense of the world. "Do you ever consider things?" "Yes," I said, "all the time." "And does it help?" "When I was about your age, your grandfather used to take me to the lake every weekend. One time, while we were out swimming, he told me that there was an angry octopus that lived inside of the lake that ate little boys. I got so scared, I refused to get back in the water." "And was there an octopus?" "No, your grandfather was just playing a trick on me. There was never any octopus in the lake, but I didn't believe that. The octopus felt real to me. After hearing your grandfather's story, I was sure I could feel the octopus in the water. I was sure he was there." "But then you considered that he wasn't there," my daughter said thoughtfully. There was awe in her voice, as if I'd revealed some grand cosmic secret to her. "You considered, and you weren't scared anymore." A bit of the summer breeze drifted in through the open window. My daughter no longer seemed scared. I felt like a good dad. "Do you want to consider that maybe the squiggle is just a figment of your imagination?" "What's a figment?" "It doesn't matter. Just consider that there is no monster in your closet." "Okay." She shut her eyes in concentration. For a moment, she struggled with the thoughts, but then her eyes opened. She smiled. "Thank you, Daddy," she said. Outside, the sky was a chaotic smattering of stars. Somewhere off in the distance, a police siren crawled into the night. I was the only one looking at the closet. "Not scared anymore?" I asked. "No, I consider the squiggle might not be real, and now I'm not scared." "Great," I said and got up. "Good night, Annie." "Good night, Daddy." She pulled her unicorn covers over herself and shut her eyes. I looked at the closet. It was covered with cartoon horse stickers that had fused themselves into the wood. The closet would forever remain covered in ponies. It perplexed me how anyone could be scared of such a harmless piece of furniture. "Hey, Annie," I said, eyeing the closet handle. "Want me to check inside of the closet?" She sat up in bed, confused. "Why? There's nothing there." Another rush of pride went through my lungs. The talk had gone better than expected. "For old time's sake," I said. She laughed at me as if I was ridiculous for suggesting that something might be in the closet, but she sat up in bed to get a better view. I grabbed the handle and prepared to swing the door open in a theatrical fashion, but I couldn't. I was positive that there was nothing in the closet. I knew that the squiggle was just a product of my daughter's imagination. I even found the idea of spaghetti with eyes to be a bit funny. Yet, somewhere deep within me, a primal fear bubbled. I was consciously aware that the closet was empty, but there was doubt in my heart. "Daddy?" she asked. "Are you scared?" "No," I said. "I'm not scared." I pulled open the door and defiantly stared into the abyss of tiny dresses and coats. For a brief moment, my rational mind took control and chastised me for being overly dramatic. But then, in the darkness of the clothes, I saw movement. I saw that blasphemous monstrosity which confounded my entire perception of the universe. I saw that horrid nightmare pried from the depths of God's fever dreams. I saw the squiggle. The visage of the corroded flesh stole the blood from my face. Its sickly eyes stared deep into my soul. My knees became weak. I couldn't stand in the same world that the monstrosity existed in. The unyielding pressure of an incoming faint pushed my body off balance. Before the curtains of reality came down, I remember swaying toward the closet. My face became intimately familiar with one of the cartoon horse stickers my daughter had attached to the furniture. With a dull wooden thud, I lost consciousness. I awoke to the sensation of frozen peas pressed against my forehead. The lights were on. I was on the couch in the living room. Next to me sat my wife, one hand on the makeshift ice pack, the other gripped around a phone. "Should I call an ambulance?" she asked. "No," I said. "No, I'm fine." "You're shaking." I was. The afterimage of the horror was still bouncing around my skull. The unexplainable madness that I'd witnessed was still sending twitches through my shivering muscles. "I'm fine," I repeated. "What happened?" My mouth felt like it was full of battery acid. There were no words to explain the ghastly fiend that I had seen hiding in my daughter's closet. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pray. I wanted to beg the heavens for some sort of an explanation to the cruel images that were seared into my mind. "I fell," I finally said. "I'm fine." "Are you sure?" "Yes." She lifted the frozen peas off my forehead. "It doesn't look like you'll need stitches." "Good," I said. I wasn't there. I wasn't sitting on the couch being tended to by my wife. I was somewhere else. I was standing, stark naked, before a cruel world I never knew existed. A horrible blizzard of incomprehensible shapes was freezing my bones. I was a frail worm, face to face with the Goliath of the abyss. I was nothing in a world that meant me harm. Yet suddenly, past the fear, past the soul-shattering features of the abomination, something recognizable took hold. A familiar worry grasped my being. I sat up on the couch. "Where's Annie?" "Sleeping," my wife said. "I came as soon as I heard the crash. The blood from your cut scarred her for a bit, but she was tuckered out enough to fall asleep." I got up and moved straight towards my daughter's bedroom. My fear of that horrid creature had not passed. With every step towards her room, my jaw clenched tighter and tighter, but my legs carried me regardless. I needed to make sure my child was safe. She was lying in bed, deep in her dreams. The unicorn covers were pulled over her face. Her closet was shut. "Are you coming back to bed?" My wife's touch made me flinch. I couldn't keep my eyes off the closet. There was a dark spot where my forehead met the furniture. "I'm going to clean up the blood," I said. "Don't wait up." "Are you sure you're fine?" "Yeah," I lied. The damp cloth from the kitchen didn't make a difference. I was too late. My blood had soaked into the cartoon horse sticker. The red splotch would be a permanent feature of my daughter's closet. I would always be reminded of what I had seen. I considered whether the creature that I had seen could have been a byproduct of a lack of sleep, but the thought refused to take hold. The body of the creature had managed to seem both impossible and unavoidably real in the same stroke. I knew that I could not sleep unless I convinced myself the horror had never been real to begin with. With my mind turning faint again, I touched the handle of the closet. My vision was starting to blur. A familiar sound of static started to buzz around my ears, but I didn't let go of the closet door. I needed to confront reality. I needed to believe that the squiggle wasn't real. The empty closet did not lighten my heart. It simply reminded me of what I saw. It simply made the memory of the burning bush of flesh and eyes shine brighter. "The squiggle ran away." She looked at me from a unicorn bed. There was a calmness in her voice which suggested the hellspawn we had both witnessed wasn't a thing worth worrying about. "You saw it? You saw that thing?" She nodded her head. "After you hit your head in the closet door, it crawled over you and jumped out the window." "Crawled over me?" I yelled, louder than I should have. I could hear my wife switch on the night lamp in the bedroom. "Yeah," my daughter replied casually. "The squiggle went over your tummy and out the window. It's okay. It's not real." The thought of those wet strands of flesh crawling over my body made me feel incurably violated. My abdomen was no longer my own. It belonged to that horrible nightmare. "But you saw it?" "Yes." "And you're not scared?" "No," she said, smiling. "I considered whether the squiggle was real, and now I'm brave like you." I wanted to grab her and tell her that she should be scared. I wanted to tell her that what she saw, what we both saw, was something that should inspire wails and despair. But her innocent smile made me turn away. Her fragile mind had made peace with the squiggle. I was the only one being haunted. "Good night, Annie," I said, closing a window and locking it. "Good night, Daddy," she replied, descending back into a blanket. My wife was standing in the doorway of the bedroom, concerned. I told her I couldn't go back to sleep. I told her I needed to be alone. I told her I was going to watch some television. The screen is tuned to the static of a dead channel. The ashtray is full and the bottle is half empty. We live in a universe that means us harm. We live in a godless world where unhealthy abominations hide in little girls' closets. Regardless of how much I drink or how hard I try to rationalize, I cannot convince myself otherwise. All of the windows in the house are shut and locked, but I can hear the birds starting to sing outside. A new day is starting, but I am unable to face it. I cannot carry on knowing that thing is somewhere out there, crawling through the grass. I drink more, praying that the liquor will help me forget. I drink more, desperately hoping that I'll be able to convince myself that the abomination was a trick of the eye. I drink more, knowing it won't help. My name is James Holden, and I'm a babysitter for the supernatural. No, really, that's my profession. The only difference between me and that teenage girl down your street is my clientele. I've been in the business for 7 years, and I've babysat for almost any paranormal species or family you could think of, and some you've never heard of before. Werewolf, angel, banshee, dwarf, elf, fairy, fae, golem, etc. Each one unique, each one with its own dangers. Don't get me wrong, I love my job, but that doesn't mean it's not challenging or safe. It all started 7 years ago. I was that aforementioned teen, living down the street, babysitting to make money on the side. It was a moderate business. I mostly babysat for the same few families, with the occasional stranger who had been pointed in my direction by my regulars. It wasn't the best income, honestly. For the most part, my rate sat right on, or slightly below minimum wage. It was a good job for me. It let me earn some spending money without taking up too much of my time. You can imagine how excited I was when I got an offer to watch a set of twins overnight, for quite a bit more than my average rate. That kind of money per hour for a whole night was a lot of money to me. I didn't really think about why they offered so much money up front. I suppose they thought that babysitting overnight would be a hassle. However, in my experience, it was actually really easy. The kids would be asleep most of the time. Really, all I had to do was cook dinner and breakfast. I wanted to get there before the starting time, so I started out early. Making a good impression by arriving early would increase the chance of them hiring me again. The house was well off the beaten path, and the woods leading up to it seemed heavier and darker than normal. The trees hung over the road, creating a splotchy canopy through which the sky could barely be seen. The woods seemed to absorb the noise of my car, letting nature's voice play through the usual shell of engine noise. After too long driving through these woods, the turn-off to the driveway finally came around the corner. At the end of the long gravel drive stood the house. It was a large manor, and, with the exception of a small yard, was surrounded by tall trees. The trees towered over the house, casting it in a spotty shadow, making the residence seem darker and solemn. The garden was tidy, with trimmed grass and a wooden swing set. The house itself sat 3 stories high. A stone manor, it leered over my car, its multitude of chimneys stretching towards the sky as if to escape the roof. Uncommonly, the window shutters were all latched closed, which gave the house an unnatural shut-off feel, not welcoming like other houses I'd seen in the style. I checked the car clock. 7:15. I was 15 minutes early. I did a quick check in the mirror, making sure I was presentable before exiting the car. The trees near the house, unlike the drive, seemed unnaturally quiet, and my footsteps against the gravel seemed loud. Each step grated in my ear, echoing in the silent air. As I approached the huge, double-wide front door and raised my hand to knock, it swung open suddenly. I jumped back in shock. The quiet had unsettled me more than I realized. I straightened as I realized it was just the woman who had opened the door for me. Seeing me, she cracked a wide smile. "Ah, you must be James. You're early," she noted in a soft foreign accent. "Please, come in. My girls are very excited to meet you." I followed her into a large entrance hall, depositing my shoes just inside the front door. The house was brightly lit as far as I could see, powerful lights compensating for the shuttered windows. I followed her through a tall archway into a brightly lit kitchen. Looking around at the dark marble countertops, I noted the fancy kitchen equipment. Sitting at the counters were 2 10-year-old girls, twins, dressed similarly. "Hi, I'm Stacy," the one on the right exclaimed in an excited voice. "And I'm Stephanie. It's really nice to meet you," the one on the left chimed in. After I introduced myself and explained that it was really nice to meet them as well, their mom sent them out, explaining she had to talk with me about the rules of the house. "Wow, the girls really seem to like you," she started. "I just never realized and never introduced myself. I'm Minerva. I'm so grateful that you agreed to babysit my girls. I've missed so many council meetings." "I really appreciate the chance, Minerva. Your girls seem lovely. So, what kind of council meeting are you off to?" I didn't usually ask personal questions, but she had brought it up first. It seemed like a good way to improve her opinion of me. She gave me a slight, confused smile. "Why, the Council of Witches, of course. I'm second to the High Witch, Since the girls, I haven't had the chance to attend a meeting in person. I'm sorry, I started. Did you say the Council of Witches? Yes, of course. I thought you understood this. I requested your services because I heard you had experienced dealing with demonic children. My girls would be much easier than demon spawn. I expected her to lean in, a sly smile adorning her face. Just kidding, she would exclaim. Or the two girls to pop in, laughing hard at the joke Mummy played on the new babysitter. But none of that happened. She just continued looking at me with a slight concerned expression on her face, as if I was the one playing a joke. Wait, like you're part of one of those natural covens? I asked, hoping it was that simple, that her expression simply betrayed how serious she was about these New Age covens. No, she began slowly. Did you seriously not know this, James? I mean, I'm a witch. I sit on the Council of Witches and have been for the past 100 years. The disbelief on my face must have convinced her. She didn't look any older than 35. No way she was older than 100. I was naive to think that witches had to be wrinkled, covered with warts and green skin. However, if I was going to consider their existence, I wouldn't have guessed 30-something-year-old mums. She leaned forward, looking directly into my eyes. I found myself unable to look away, or even move. Her eyes seemed larger than normal, and contained an unnatural depth of knowledge and experience. Her eyes shifted colour, red to green to blue to brown, as she peered into my very existence. I heard of the eyes being the windows to the soul, but I had no idea you could look through them. She sighed. You're telling the truth, unfortunately. It's clear you had no idea I was a witch, nor that witches even existed. This isn't good at all. I was really looking forward to that night out. What do you mean? I replied curiously. It would be irresponsible to leave an inexperienced mortal with non-mortal children. I was expecting you to have some knowledge of the mystical and non-mortal. This is very unfortunate. I'm so sorry for wasting your time. I'm happy to pay you half the night for your troubles. I glanced at the wall clock. 7:25. The entire introduction had only taken 10 minutes. It had felt much longer. I considered the dilemma before me. After looking into her eyes, I had no doubt she truly was a witch. It was weird to accept something so unnatural so easily, but the power behind her eyes was undeniable. I considered my options. The easy way out was taking the money. Half pay was really good, considering I hadn't been there an hour. I could take the money and leave, but that would leave Minerva high and dry, forced to miss a meeting. Minerva had said that her children would be much easier than demon spawn, and I dealt with some really naughty children, some regularly. But I had no idea how that compared to supernatural children. Minerva seemed really nice, but knowing what I did about her, it could completely be an act, or the cool exterior of an insane mind of a lunatic. She definitely held power. The question was, is all really as it seemed? Her daughters seemed pleasant in the little time I met them, and well behaved, at least while their mom was around. My other option was to try and take the job. I had no idea how hard the job would be, and if it went well, I might be able to babysit for her again. It definitely seemed like she was in need of a babysitter. Beyond that, if a witch needed mortal babysitters, maybe there was a whole spectrum of children that needed a night out and would pay well for babysitting. Minerva herself had said that mortals were used for such services. This could be my ticket in. It was crazy, a lunatic thought, but my curiosity and possible future of well-paid nights drove me forward. I'll do it, if you let me, I said, trying to sound confident. I really hoped this was the right choice. I had little idea what exactly I was getting myself into. James, that's very sweet of you, but... she started, but I could see the indecisiveness in her eyes, and made a decision. Look, one night can't hurt, right? I've babysat plenty before. This can't be too different. I'll be very vigilant, I interrupted. Think of it as a trial run. If it goes well, you'll know I can do it. Okay, let's call this a trial run then. I wouldn't even consider this if my meeting tonight was any less important. She agreed, then carried on. I really have to get going, but there are some things you need to know. This won't be like anything you've ever done before. Before we begin, I need to know. Can you handle scary? Don't answer immediately. Really consider this. There are things you are completely ignorant of, and you have to be able to keep a level head. I really had to look in on myself at that point. This was my last chance to just leave. I could take the money and just go. What things would I see that would have Minerva asking such a question so seriously? Of course I got scared. Everyone did. However, compared to my friends, I noticed it took quite a bit to get me. Honestly, back then, I think if I knew what I knew now, I would have taken the money and walked. I was ignorant and confident, and I remember what convinced me was the thought, no matter how bad it is, it's only one night. I was pretty stupid back then. I can handle myself, was my response, for better or worse. Excellent. And she gave me the same striking smile as before. I've written up a short letter detailing a few rules you must follow. Let me reiterate, you must follow these rules. I left my phone number at the bottom of the page. Call me if anything goes wrong. If you break a rule, heaven forbid, call me immediately. Got it. I was feeling better now. It just sounded like she had stricter rules than most parents. After reminding me to read the letter and to lock up, she went off to a conference or council or whatever. After locking the door, I took a deep breath and walked back to the kitchen to read the letter. Dear James, thank you so much for watching my girls. I'll have no doubt you'll find them to be quite the little angels. Listed below are the rules you need to follow in regards to both the children and the house. This really shouldn't be too hard of a job. The girls should go to bed not too long after I leave, and won't wake up until around 7. I should be back at 9. Most of your job will be housekeeping duties in regards to the upkeep of the house. Call me if anything goes wrong, and call me immediately if a rule gets broken. Many of the rules are time-based, so I suggest you set alarms or keep an eye on the clock. Number 1. The girls are very good at taking care of themselves. They have already had dinner and will go to bed at 8. They may want to play board games or cards until their bedtime. Number 2. Follow them upstairs and lock them into their rooms for the night. Have no concern. They have ensuite bathrooms and anything else they might need overnight. Do not unlock the door until 7. Number 3. You may hear knocking at the exterior doors and windows. This may or may not be accompanied by voices demanding you open the door. Despite whoever they sound like or claim to be, do not open the door until after 9. Number 4. You will find every door inside the house closed. This is intentional. If you wish to enter a room, knock 3 times, then listen carefully. If you hear any bumbling or mumbling or any unnatural sounds in the room, wait a few minutes, then try again. Number 5. Once you enter the room, turn around and close the door. No matter what you see, continue closing the door. You must, for no reason, stop closing the door. Number 6. There are a total of 3 mirrors in the house, 1 in my bedroom and 1 for each of my daughters in their bedrooms. There are no mirrors anywhere you will be in the house. If you find yourself looking into a mirror, stand up straight and spin around until when you look at the mirror, you see the back of your head. Slowly back out of the room, keeping your gaze locked on your reflection. If your reflection looks at you again, repeat the process and spin around. You do not have to knock on the door if you encounter a mirror, but you need to close the door. Maintain a sightline of the mirror until the door interrupts your view. Number 7. If you hear footsteps on the stairs or hear something walking toward you, find a corner and stand in it, facing the wall. Do not look for the source of the sounds, and do not turn around no matter what you feel or hear. Stay completely still and silent in the corner until you hear the footsteps ascend to the 4th floor. Number 8. There is no 4th floor. If you see stairs going upwards from the 3rd floor, turn around and walk away. Do not run. Number 9. I recommend avoiding the 3rd floor, but you are welcome to sleep there if you wish. Do not turn on any lights. Use only the red flashlight found in the kitchen. Number 10. Use any bedroom you wish, besides mine and my daughter's. Just make sure everything listed below is complete before you turn in. Number 11. Make sure the fridge is closed, the stove is off, etc. Number 12. Turn on all the TVs at 8:30 p.m. Try to turn them on close to the same time. The channel doesn't matter. There are 4 TVs to turn on. 1 in the living room, 1 in the den, and 1 in each of the 1st-story bedrooms. Number 13. There is a brown package on the kitchen counter. Using the red flashlight, take it up to the 3rd floor at 9 p.m. and place it in any of the bedrooms. Remember rules 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Number 14. They should already be closed, but double check all the shutters are closed. Number 15. Go to bed at any time. Just make sure there is a glass of water at the counter at 9:15 p.m. Do not enter the kitchen again until 9:30 p.m. regardless of what you hear. Just follow these instructions and everything will be a breeze. Take good care of my girls for me. Minerva. After reading the letter, I was wishing she had let me read it before leaving. This was crazy. What did some of these even mean? Why did there have to be a glass of water on the counter at exactly 9:15? And what sounds was I gonna hear? What exactly did the mirrors in this house do? I was wishing I'd been smart enough to take half pay and just leave, but I wasn't, and here I was. I wasn't about to call Minerva back, not after I said I'd do it, and especially not after she already left. Damn, I wish I'd been confident enough to call her back home. The girls were very well behaved, just as the letter said. We started a game of Monopoly, but had to stop for their bedtime. It was a new experience for me. I'd never before babysat kids who were so responsible about getting to bed exactly on time. Now it was just me and the house. It seemed unnaturally quiet. There would have been sunlight outside still, but the house had many shutters, and the only light came from the numerous lamps and ceiling lights. I glanced at my watch. 8:25. It was a nice watch, with the ability to set multiple alarms. I went ahead and set alarms for 8:30 p.m, 9 p.m, 9:15 p.m, 9:30 p.m, and 9 a.m, which seemed like a lot to me. I went back to the kitchen and had a look around. It was a big modern kitchen, a kitchen island in the middle, a wall of counters to the side, and, of course, the quintessential stove and fridge. Nothing out of the ordinary. I went ahead and found the red flashlight and placed it next to the brown package. I didn't know if I could leave the cup of water out now and just stay out of the kitchen, or if I had to fill it at the set time. Figuring it was safer to fill it later, I went out in hunt of the TVs. The hallway was almost blindingly bright. Several ceiling lights and lamps contributed to this effect. She hadn't left me a map or anything. All I knew was that I had to find 4 TVs. I already saw the one in the living room, and figured I could just search all the rooms on the 1st floor till I found the other 3. In my head, I had reassured myself that it all must be a joke on the new babysitter. Sure, Minerva had looked sincere, but any actor could look sincere. My reasoning at that point was that I would follow any trackable rule, moving a package she'd know, turning on TVs that would also be an obvious tell. The glass of water would be a visible sign if I'd follow the rules. However, she would have no idea if I looked into a mirror, or if I opened a door correctly. Actually, she might be able to know through sensors or something. I had no idea how complex this was. I made my mind up. At the 1st door, I would follow all the rules to a T. The perfect babysitter. Then I would check the door and see if I could find any sign of equipment. If not, I could just drop the excess rules. I'd met some eccentric parents with weird requests before. I figured Minerva was just one of these, albeit a bit more eccentric. I found a door and, checking the rules, knocked thrice. Hearing nothing on the other side, I entered. Turning around inside, I closed the door firmly. I found myself in a medium-sized bedroom with a TV hanging on the wall. Examining the door with all the scrutiny I could manage, no trace of sensor equipment was found. Figuring this was all the reason I needed to ignore the rules, I turned on the TV and returned to the hallway. 2 down, 2 to go. A bedroom and a den, according to the letter. I returned to the hallway and sought out the next room. Coming up to the second door, I barged in like I owned the place, and froze. The scene before me was a gory massacre. It looked like a dungeon out of a horror film, filmed with malicious instruments of pain. Sitting at a tool bench facing away from me was what looked like a wiry man. He seemed indifferent to the scene, and indeed some of the filth appeared to be soaking into his loafers. It looked like he was tinkering with something in front of him, and the quiet clinking of metal could be heard. It was a ludicrous comparison, this man sitting at a bench and the room he sat in. Above his head hung a TV, similarly out of place. He didn't seem to notice that I'd opened the door, so I slowly eased it shut, cringing at the soft click of the latch. I sunk to the floor in sheer shock at what I had seen. Why exactly did Minerva have such a room? Was I in danger? I had so many thoughts whirling through my head. I wanted to run, I wanted to hide, I wanted to stay still. It's hard to put into words, but that room was scary. The scariest thing I'd ever seen in my young life. Scarier by far than any horror movie. The simple reality of that room horrified me in ways I'd never felt before. I took deep breaths and reined in my wild thoughts, tightening my resolve. I had to know if the rules were the real thing. I wasn't confident enough to enter that room and talk to the man inside. A quick glance at him had been enough to keep me from thinking of trying to converse with him. I was, however, ready to try knocking on the door, with the stupid confidence many teens hold. I reread the rules to be certain, then precisely and quietly knocked 3 times. I listened carefully, standing stock still. Nothing. I could hear nothing. I, as slowly and quietly as I could, turned the knob and peered into the room with one eye. It looked like a regular bedroom now. I really wanted to stop and question my sanity at that point, but this sight had fueled my determination to follow the rules, silly or not. I entered the room, turned around and closed the door. Standing there, I took a second to collect my thoughts. When Minerva had told me this wouldn't be a usual babysitting job, I had believed her. She looked so earnest and honest. Once she left, I'd come to the conclusion that the rules must be fake or in jest. I didn't want to accept that the supernatural existed, or that somebody could be a witch. Well, now I found myself having to accept this reality, if only to preserve my sanity by devoting myself to what I had to now accept as fact. The rules were real, and had to be followed. The house obviously had the potential to be a house of horror. This was clear enough, seeing as I was standing in a bedroom that was but a minute ago a dungeon. I checked my watch. 8:35. I had 10 minutes until I had to take the package upstairs. I turned the TV on, then took a deep breath and exited the room. The hallways seemed more sinister to me now. The once reassuringly bright lights seemed harsher than before. I found the den, staying as quiet as I could. After knocking, I heard soft whimpering inside. Not stupid enough to break the rules again, I waited 3 minutes before trying once more. This time, the den was silent, so I turned the TV on and returned to the kitchen. Having to wait for the door had thrown off my time, and I grabbed the package along with the flashlight. Heading upstairs, I considered my situation. I figured everything would be fine as long as I followed the rules. They had to be clung to with a desire for life. Leaving the house was out of the question. The rules forbid it until 9 in the morning. Luckily for me, I only had one task after this. Then I would try and sleep the night away. I stopped on the landing. This wasn't right. The rules said the 3rd floor would be dark, unlike the rest of the house. The hallway before me was just as bright as the 1st floor. I felt a sinking feeling in my gut. This was the 4th floor. I had gone up too far. The hallway before me looked exactly like the first floor hallway, but there was no end in sight. Just a hallway full of doors and lamps stretching on into the distance. I considered what to do. Going back down the stairs sounded like the obvious option, but that might be the very thing that sets my fate. Maybe I had to go forward, or even enter a certain room. While I stood there, building up the courage to call Minerva and tell of my colossal screw-up, I heard a sound on the stairs below me. Step, drip, drip. Step, drip, step. The sounds were coming up the stairs, and I wasn't about to meet the owner of those ominous steps. It was too fast. They were coming too fast. No time to think, no time to plan, no time to knock. I hurried into the first room on my right as the steps reached the stairs. Clutching the brown package to my chest, I could hear it in the hallway. Step, step. I stopped breathing, listening closely to the sound. Now it was definitely on the 4th floor with me. I stood as still as I could. I heard it pass the door. Then I breathed a quiet sigh as it continued down the hallway. I took a second to look around, to make sure I really was safe. It looked like a bedroom, identical to the first two, except for the dark red colour of the paint. Those steps had convinced me that I had to call Minerva, embarrassed by my mistakes or not. How ironic. I found myself in this situation by breaking the rules, while considering the importance of following the rules I'd been given. I almost wanted to cry. This wasn't... well, I guess it was what I signed up for. But still, it was crazy. I pulled out my phone and was reassured when I noticed there were full bars. I hadn't even considered I might not be able to call, but it was reassuring to see that it was possible. Hello? Hi, Minerva? We may have a small problem. What's wrong, James? I went ahead and told her all that had happened. There was no reason to hold anything back, seeing as I'd already called and interrupted a meeting. So, you're on the 4th floor with a brown package and something dripping went past you? That sounds about right. Okay, listen to me very carefully. 3 questions will decide exactly how bad the situation is. She sounded tense, worried. Exactly what room are you in? Did you knock before entering the room? Finally, did you go to a corner when you heard the footsteps? I felt sick hearing the second question, and even worse on the third. I had completely forgotten the rule about finding a corner after hearing the footsteps. I'm in a bedroom, the first door on the right. I didn't knock before entering. I didn't find a corner either. I'm so sorry. I was just so scared. It happened so fast I couldn't even think. I meant to sound strong, but I found myself stammering and almost blubbering by the end of my confession. Oh, thank God. She sounded relieved. No, James, it's really good you didn't knock or find a corner. Really, really good. The 4th floor is completely different. It doesn't even exist. It's very complicated, but basically the rules are different there. If you had knocked or entered a corner, this would be a lot worse. Much, much worse. Okay, well, that's reassuring. I tried not to let just how glad I was to hear that creep into my voice. So, what do I need to do? You still have the package. In one motion, as fast as you can, open the door and throw the package away from the stairs, then run straight to the ground floor. Count the flights. Do not go one too many and end up in the basement. That would be much worse than the 4th floor, she instructed calmly. Okay, I got it. But what about leaving the package on the 3rd floor? Do you have another one? No, but it'll be okay for one night. I'll do 2 packages tomorrow night. I wondered exactly what the nature and purpose of those packages were. Sorry about all of this. I should have just followed the rules from the beginning. Yes, you should have. In all honesty, this is the best case scenario for having broken the rules. Not that it makes this any better, it just could have been better. With that, I hung up and prepared to save myself. The whole conversation felt very surreal, but then again, this whole situation was weird. I put my hand on the doorknob and readied the package for throwing. Pulling swiftly, I saw a glance of a dark shape across the hall before I threw the package with all my might and dashed down the stairs. Counting carefully, I stopped only when I reached the ground floor, breathing heavily. I checked my watch. 2 minutes to 9. Once again, it felt like I had been upstairs much longer than that. It was probably a good thing. Any longer and I wouldn't have time to do the water. I ran to the kitchen and filled the glass to place on the counter. Exiting back into the living room, I collapsed onto a couch. I felt exhausted, mentally and physically. It had only been a few hours, but in that time, I'd seen a torture chamber, ended up on the 4th floor, almost ran into a dripping figure, and broke 4 rules. The next morning came quick, luckily for me. I had slept in one of the bedrooms upstairs. There hadn't been any footsteps, nobody knocked on the windows, and I hadn't yet encountered a mirror. I was feeling much better compared to last night. I waited until 7, then unlocked the girls' rooms. We were making pancakes in the kitchen when the knock came. "Hello in there, it's Minerva, I'm back." A muffled voice came from the front door. Both the girls had frozen. I caught the eye of Stacy, and she slowly shook her head. I remembered the rules. She would be back at 9. I wasn't to open the door until 9, despite who was at the door. I considered calling out, but judging by the reactions of the girls, silence was the best course of action. "Hello?" the voice came again, starting to sound annoyed. "Will you please let me in? I forgot my house key last night." We all stayed still. "Come on," the voice was angry now. "It's Minerva, you have to let me in. I want to see my girls." Still, we waited. Finally, we heard the person, whatever it was, moving away from the house. The girls relaxed, and the pancake making recommenced. I didn't want to ask the girls, but I was curious as to what would be impersonating. That's more or less the end of the story of my first time as a supernatural babysitter. I could bore you and describe how Minerva finally came home and explain that she would refer me to other such families, and how I accepted. But I won't. Mostly because, despite my efforts, I didn't really learn anything important from Minerva at the time. One day, Minerva would explain much to me. But that's a story for another time. It happened 8 years ago. She was out partying with some friends, and they stupidly decided to take a drive. All of them were pretty intoxicated and rowdy, so the whole night was a bad idea even before it started. As her friends who survived tell the story, they were blasting music and all dancing. They decided to go off-road, heading towards the cows and hills that cover the outskirts of our tiny town. They were going just a little too fast and ended up in the middle of a bunch of cows. As they swerved to miss one, they ended up in the path of a tree, and my sister's head slammed into it as they passed, completely decapitating her. Out of fear, they didn't go to the cops whenever it happened. They came to our house first. My other sister, screaming and crying from downstairs, is what woke me. My dad told me to stay in bed, but a 10-year-old isn't going to listen to that, especially whenever there is that much commotion in their house. So I slowly crept down the stairs, but no one else was really paying attention to me. No one in our family has ever really paid attention to me since that night. I saw her girlfriends covered in blood splatter, makeup running down their faces. I saw her friend, Randy, carefully holding something wrapped in a blanket, tears falling down his face. I saw my other sister punching her boyfriend Sam, and not once did he try to fight back. I saw my mom unwrap the blanket and fall to her knees in shock. I saw my dad run up and try to cover my eyes, but it was too late. I saw her head, completely smashed and unrecognizable. Her eyeballs were blown out. The only way you knew it was her was by her strawberry blonde hair, now caked and matted in dirt, grass and blood. I will never forget seeing that. I relive that night almost every time I close my eyes to go to sleep. Randy got charged with involuntary manslaughter, among other things, but he got let out early for good behavior. Our family doesn't hold it against him, but he definitely held it against himself. He took his own life less than a month after getting released. Sam ended up getting an alcohol problem, and most of her girlfriends struggled with substance abuse and mental health as well. It was just as hard on them as it was on us. I heard the phone call that started it all. It was the call where she planned on sneaking out that night to go to the party, and she didn't know I was home whenever she made the plans. "Oh, Mikey," she yelled as she turned around and saw me. "You scared me. I didn't know you were home. I thought you had soccer practice." "They cancelled it," I said from a bedroom doorway. "I was going to ask you to make some pizza rolls." Yeah, sure. I'll make you some in a minute. Just go play some video games or something." She threw her phone on the bed and started fidgeting with her hair as I turned around to head down the walkway. "Hey, Mikey, wait." I turned around just as she poked her head out of her door. "Did you hear that phone call?" she asked. I nodded, knowing what was about to happen because it had happened so many times before. It was normal to me at this point. "Do you want me to go get you a new game this weekend?" I grinned ear to ear and eagerly nodded as she smiled as well. Our agreement understood. And so I went and played video games just as I had done many days after our secret agreement. She had done this many times with my other sister and I because we tended to always catch her making plans she shouldn't be making. It had become natural to us, so we didn't think anything bad could ever come from it. Her head didn't show up until about 3 years ago. I was at home, alone, once again playing video games like I always do. I mostly did it as a distraction at this point though, because whenever I was home alone, I swore I could sometimes hear her calling my name. Now I legitimately hear it, because she's in my closet, but for the longest time, I thought our house was haunted with a ghost. Either that, or I was just haunted with the memory of her. There was a ring at the doorbell, so I paused the game I was playing and rushed down the stairs to see who it was. By the time I got there, whoever had left had seemingly disappeared into thin air. They left a plain cardboard box, nothing specific or special about it. I figured it was just another package of my mum's, another one of the million things she had ordered off of Amazon, so I put it on the side table by the front door for her to open later. It wasn't until later that night whenever she finally opened it and laughed at the prank I'd pulled on her. "Mikey, there's nothing in this box. You really had my hopes up my sweater had finally come in though." She laughed and then handed me the box. I furrowed my brow at her before asking, "What do you mean there's nothing in the box? And why would you think it's a sweater?" I carefully shook the contents of the box. "It's too heavy to be a sweater." "You're really going all out on this joke, huh?" she replied as she walked towards the kitchen. "Open it for yourself, jokester." Her insistence that I was joking confused me even more, considering I could literally feel the weight of whatever was inside the box just by holding it. It definitely was too big for a sweater, and I don't know why they'd even put a sweater in a box this size. Before opening it, I was still sure that it was just something my mum had ordered that she had forgotten about, so I carefully put it down on the coffee table so as to not damage whatever was inside. I opened it back up, and immediately the smell about knocked me off my feet. Whenever I actually looked inside the box, it took my mind about a minute to register that it was my sister's rotting head, considering that's not a normal thing that people just see every day. I sat there for at least 3 seconds staring at it before I screamed so loud my voice began to crack. My mom came sprinting back into the living room with a look of terror on her face, screaming at me to tell her what happened, but I couldn't form words from the shock. I just started sobbing hysterically and pointing at the box. She jerked the box up, and I winced in reaction, fully expecting for the head to accidentally fly out with how hard she jerked it. "There's nothing in here, Mikey," she said angrily. She threw the box down on the coffee table, as if it was as light as a feather, but I still heard the thud of the head bouncing in the box. "Can you stop with these stupid jokes, please?" she snapped, before she realized I was legitimately terrified. It was her turn to furrow her brow in confusion, and she sat down beside me and wrapped me up in her arms, shocking me as it was the first time she had done it in years. "Honey, what is going on?" She wiped the tears from my face and softly moved my head, so I was looking her in the eyes. A million thoughts went through my head at once. Was I going crazy? Why could she not see it? Should I tell her what I'm seeing? Would she think I'm crazy? I decided not to tell her, because she had enough stress on her hands as it is, and she didn't need more stress added on with the possibility of an insane child. I shook my head as a response and mumbled an excuse about there being a bug on the box. I could tell she didn't believe me, but she didn't question me any further. She just held me until I stopped crying. I will admit that I forced a few more tears to come out, just to have some more time with her. From that day on, I didn't try to show her or any other family members, partly out of fear that one of them would see the same horrors I had, and partly out of fear that they wouldn't, and I would be deemed insane. I did try to show a few friends over the years, let them hold the box and try to guess what was inside. They all thought it was a joke as well, because clearly there was nothing inside. I hid the box in my closet, and it only took a few months for her to begin speaking to me. It started one night when I was struggling to sleep. I kept feeling like her head was staring at me, even through the cardboard box and the door of my closet. I tried to ignore it and distract myself by thinking of happy memories of her before she died. All of the times we stayed up watching movies past bedtime, whenever she would take me to the park to play as a little kid, and all the times she would play hide and seek with me. I was thinking about that one year we had to spend Christmas Eve with no power because the snow had knocked it out, and our parents lied to us and said Santa just had to borrow the power to fuel his toy shop machines. That's when she decided to speak, simply saying, "I miss the snow." I assumed I was just hearing things whenever she spoke. I was nearly convinced I was finally fully off my rocker, but then, after I sat there for a minute without responding, I heard a usual aggravated gasp that I had heard so many times before as a child. "Are you just going to ignore me, Mikey? I literally came back just for you, so that's kind of rude." I heard the walls of the cardboard box being thumped as if her head was being rocked back and forth. My eyes went wide in terror as I tried to decide if I should just keep ignoring it. "Mikey, let me out of this box, now!" I shot up and out of my bed at that moment and ran towards the closet, jerking the door open. I didn't know if anyone else could hear her, but I didn't want to risk finding out. I didn't really know how to explain my dead sister's voice suddenly yelling at 2 a.m. The box was covered in flies, the smell was absolutely dreadful, and I almost puked when I felt the wetness of the box, but I grabbed it anyway out of fear of her angrily screaming again. I placed the box on my desk. I grabbed a random towel off my floor from my shower earlier and placed it next to the box. I didn't really know how to grab a head, so I tried to smoothly roll it out of the box instead, causing her to become a makeshift bowling ball and nearly knocked everything off my desk. "Hey!" she yelled in anger once again, and I hurriedly shushed her. I used the towel to grab her head and position it so it was facing my bed before sitting down to face her myself. Her eyes had been closed whenever I first found her, but they were open now. They looked as dead as she was, but they were still slowly blinking. I started to softly cry, and she did her best to calm me down as well as a decapitated head of your sister could. I struggled to look at her, but I got used to it over time. We ended up spending the whole night talking, and I caught her up on how life had been since she had left us. I kept asking her over and over to explain how this was happening, but she refused to tell me. I honestly believed that when I fell asleep that night, I would wake up and it would be the day the box had came. I would realize it was all just a nightmare and the box would be delivered with a sweater or another random item my mum had ordered. Honestly, the first few months were great. Once I got past the smell and the overall appearance of my sister, it was almost like having her back here with me. No one else ever noticed the smell, so I finally decided I was the only one who could see her. The pandemic really helped because masks helped me deal with the smell and I had more free time to spend with her. I was afraid her head would keep on decaying until she ended up leaving me again, but it always seemed to stay at the same amount of grotesqueness and rotting. It didn't become a burden until she started crying that she was hungry. At first, it was a guessing game on what she wanted to eat. I brought her just about everything in the fridge, and she turned it all down. I asked her if she wanted things from the grocery store, and even spent all my money on her favourite snacks from when she was alive, only for her to turn it all down. It wasn't until a bird flew into my bedroom window by chance one afternoon that I finally began to realise what a dreadful thing her appetite was. She started yelling for me to get it for her. I tried to argue at first, but as you can guess, she won in the end. Whenever I gave it to her, she started giggling, which quickly turned into a maniacal laughter that she had later told me was from the joy of finally having a good meal. She completely devoured the bird, bones and all, and it disgusted me so much that I had to sprint to the bathroom to throw up. From that day on, she demanded I bring her dead animals, and for a while, that was enough. I tried to find other alternatives for her that seemed less cruel, like raw sushi for instance, but she acted like me suggesting that was like chopping off her head again. She slowly grew bored with the animals and started to demand more though. Whenever there would be news stories on TV about missing children, she would fantasize to me about eating them, how good they would taste, how tender their flesh would be, how full it would make her feel. I don't really understand what part of her gets full, but she insisted human flesh would make her the fullest she had ever been. Her fantasizing turned to brainstorming as she thought out ways for me to catch a most desired meal, and I tried to refuse her first, just like I did with the animals. I really did. But then she started to make me feel guilty for her death. She knew I felt responsible because I never told her parents that she was going to sneak out, and she heavily used it to her advantage to get what she wanted. And now, here I am, a full-blown child kidnapper, just about to feed my sister's decapitated head. Sounds crazy, right? I know it does. You probably won't even believe me, but all of this is 100% true. I wish it wasn't, I truly do. I wish I didn't know the best ways to get a child to trust me. I wish I didn't know the best, most secluded spots that are the easiest to guide a child to, only to snatch them up and into your trunk. I wish I didn't know how to quickly and efficiently chop up a child's dead body. I wish I didn't know how fast it takes a demon to eat a child, because that's what I've realized she is. A demon. I know this thing isn't my sister, but now I'm stuck dealing with the burden of it. There's no way this pure evil has any bit of my sister in it, and I'm ashamed that it tricked me so easily into believing it was her at first. I've started to notice that every time I feed it another child, it gets stronger. It looks less decayed, and it looks like its neck is actually growing longer. I'm not sure if it can fully grow back its body, but I couldn't do anything to stop it anyway. It's attached to me now, and as I feel it growing stronger, I feel myself growing weaker, as if it is eating my spirit for energy as well. It already knows I know it's not her, but it also knows I have no way of escaping from it. Any time I try to destroy it, it never works. The first time I tried to get rid of it, I tried putting it in a trash bag and taking the trash can outside, but it just began screaming. It screamed every day for 3 days, non-stop. At first, it was kind of quiet, like you could mistake it for cicadas, but then it grew louder and louder until it made my ears ring and became painful. I'm very glad no one else could hear it. I brought it back in and tried to burn it. It tried to bite me while I poured the lighter fluid on it, but I gagged its mouth. It didn't burn one bit, but it still cried like it was in pain, which I'm convinced was only done to bother me because of how much it sounded like my sister. I drove it out to the local dump, only to have it appear back in its box whenever I returned home. I even tried to throw it in my neighbor's woodchucker one day, and it flew back out the other side, completely unharmed. Nothing ever works, and I'm honestly ready to give up. I know this exactly what it wants, and I'm ready to give it at this point. My family doesn't seem to really care about my existence, and I feel like if they knew I had a way to stop it that night, they would hate me as much as I hate myself. I'm ready to give into whatever this demon wants, because I have nothing left to live for. This is the end of my story, sadly. She's calling for more flesh, and I don't have anything for her. I'm about to go out for another catch, but I know it'll never be enough for her appetite. It grows and grows every day. So be careful out there, and be sure not to open any boxes that may appear at your doorstep. You wouldn't want to end up like me. I volunteer on a crisis hotline once a week. Most of the time, people who call the line just need someone to hear them, someone to sit in the darkness with them so they know that they aren't alone in their suffering. We get calls from all types of people: distressed teens, drug addicts, people fighting with mental illnesses, elderly folks who have no one left to share their final days with, third-party callers who know someone who is displaying suicidal behavior. Many of these calls are silent, or the caller instantly hangs up. Most calls center around loneliness. People going through hardship often feel like a burden when sharing their pain with friends and family, so they keep it bottled up inside, where it festers and builds to a point where the pain is so overwhelming they would do anything to make it stop. Our job is to listen and help them find options. It's not something I normally speak about, but I had once been on the other side of the line here. After years of struggling with alcohol addiction and a series of very bad choices, I'd hit rock bottom, and this really had been my lifeline. Calling the hotline had been the first step on a long journey that I'm still far from finishing. But after years of therapy and abstinence later, I feel that if I can be that voice that pulls even one person out of that rut, all that might have been worth something. I remember the first time that caller unknown called me. Our caller ID usually shows the caller's number unless they intentionally block it, so I thought it was probably a police department or some social service representative calling. I worked the midnight to 4 a.m. shift. I am a pretty nocturnal guy to begin with, and that shift needed the most help, so I had no problem signing up for it. Call volume is a lot lower during these hours, so it's usually just me and a few other counselors and one supervisor in the call center during this time. Caller unknown first contacted me at 1:27 a.m. on February 17th. I answered with my standard, "Suicide Prevention Center, you're speaking with my name. Can I get your name?" There was no answer for a few seconds. This is pretty standard, especially with new callers who don't know what to say once they've opened that door. "I'm here to listen when you're ready to talk," I told the silent line. "Take your time." I waited for a bit longer, then heard a loud digital static interfere with the line. The digital static stopped and returned to the regular phone static, then cut out, leaving the line completely silent. I checked the call application to see if the call had disconnected, but the time counter continued to tick. I checked my headset to see if I'd muted or messed it up somehow. The digital static returned, much louder this time. Then the call disconnected. I didn't think anything of it at the time, and went on with my shift as per usual. February 24th at 1:27 a.m, caller unknown called back. It was the same as before. A long silence, then loud digital noise, then disconnection. I wouldn't have noticed it as unusual if not for the digital noise. I checked my call log and realized that it had come in the exact same time as last week. I figured it could be some sort of spam bot set up to call numbers on a schedule. I messaged my supervisor about it, and he sent me a gif with Chandler Bing from Friends shrugging in an exaggerated manner. My thoughts exactly. 1 week later, on March 3rd, things got stranger. I accepted a call from a woman, Jane Doe, going through a divorce who was suffering nightly from thoughts of suicide. Her call came in around 1:19 a.m, and we had just gotten through the basic risk assessment and the beginning of her story when her voice started cutting out. The digital static returned, this time even louder than before. I had to pull the headphones away from my ears. The clock read 1:27 a.m. The digital noise stopped, and the line went dead, just like before. Then the normal phone static returned. "Are you still there, Jane?" I asked. "I think we got cut off there for a minute." There was no answer immediately. Then I heard a man's voice that sounded like he'd left the phone on the table and was speaking from many feet away. "Please, help." "Hello, can you hear me?" I asked. "You sound like you're far from the phone. Can you move any closer?" Again, barely audible, far from the receiver, I heard the words. "Please, help." "Are you in danger right now?" I asked. "If you're in need of immediate medical assistance, I need to know your location, or you need to call 911. "Please." Then the line popped, and Jane's voice came back. "Are you still there?" she asked. "Yes, Jane? I'm sorry, I heard someone else's voice. Are you with someone right now?" "No, I'm alone," she said. Confused, I apologized for the technical difficulties and continued with the call. I pinged IT about the issue, and they said that they didn't notice any sort of interference on their end, but would keep an eye out for issues. The next week, caller unknown returned. I answered and didn't say anything this time. I waited through the introductory static, then heard the man's voice. He was closer to the phone this time. He sounded old, like his vocal cords were damaged. The words were strained and gravelly, as if pushed through broken reeds. "Please, help." "Sir, if you want me to help you, I need to know what's happening. Are you able to hear me?" "Please, help." "Sir, please call 911 if you need immediate medical assistance. I'm going to have to end the call if we can't communicate here." A long silence. Then, as if he had turned speakerphone on and placed the receiver to his lips, "Please, help," blasted into my ears at full volume. I threw the headset off my ears, and the call disconnected. Because there was no number listed, we couldn't place the caller on alert, but we noted it, and I finished my shift. My supervisor said it was probably some sort of prank caller or someone with mental illness in an obsessive cycle. He didn't have any idea why the calls kept getting assigned to me. No one else had reported a call from caller unknown yet. On my drive home that night, the man's voice was stuck in my head, almost as if I could hear him in the distance. It didn't feel like a prank to me. There was so much pain in that voice, physical, psychological. The tone was pure suffering, a death rattle. I imagined a frail old man crumpled on the floor of his cluttered apartment without the mental clarity to call 911. He called the one number that he had memorized. Perhaps he'd received help on the hotline before. I took some deep breaths and tried to ground myself. It isn't healthy to take the calls home with you. I did what I could to the best of my ability, and there was nothing else I could do for caller unknown. It did stick with me though. The thought that disturbed me the most was how much I wanted a drink to drown out that damn voice. I came down with some sort of flu the next week. By Wednesday, my fever was down, but I still felt too exhausted to stay awake and supportive through the graveyard shift, so I called in for a substitution and took the night off. I passed out around 10 p.m. into a restless, fever sleep and was awoken by the ringing of my phone at 1:28 a.m. I stumbled across my room to the dresser and grabbed the phone. It was set to Do Not Disturb at night. The only way a call could come through is if the caller dialed it multiple times. Unknown caller. My thumb hovered over the accept button, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. After a minute, a voicemail appeared. I pressed play and held the phone to my ear. Static. Loud digital noise. Silence. Then a low moan. It sounded like a feral cat at first, then wavered as he ran out of breath. He let out another loud moan through those broken vocal cords. It crescendoed into a scream of agony. I could hear it echo across his room. Please help, please help, please help. The line cut out. I know I should have kept the call for evidence or whatever, but it felt cursed. It felt like having that voice stored on my phone had tainted the device, and by holding it, I was cursed by extension. I deleted the voicemail and powered off my phone. I laid awake in bed, head spinning. The whole thing felt like a fever dream, and for a while, I convinced myself it was just that. I could live with a fever dream. It had been a while since I'd had a drink, but tonight, I felt like I'd earned one. Anything to get to sleep. I'd work tomorrow. I'd be useless, half sick, and sleep deprived. Besides, I'd worked hard for self-control these past years. I got out of bed and walked across the street to the 7-Eleven and grabbed a cheap bottle of Jim Beam. I took a few swigs on the way home, then took a couple of glasses to put me to sleep. Apart from a hangover the next morning, things were fine, and I was able to move past it. A week later, however, all hopes of this being some sort of flu-induced nightmare faded. I returned to my shift at the call center. I only had one real call and 2 hang-ups by 1:15 a.m. I turned my status to not available in our call application and told my supervisor I was going to take a quick walk. I shut off my cell phone and left it at my desk and went outside. It was chilly that night, and I'd forgotten to bring a jacket. I walked along the side of the street for a while. I sat at a bus stop nearby and watched the empty night streets. A car drove by about every other minute. I always wondered where these people were driving this late on a weeknight. Maybe other graveyard shifts, coming home from a lover's apartment, or maybe they were wandering. I'd done my fair share of that. I glanced at my watch. 1:28 a.m. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath and felt the cool air fill my lungs. I'd heard the deep bass of music coming from a black SUV down the street. Then, my heart stopped. The SUV came to a stop at the light in front of me, and the deep bass of the music cut out, interfered by that familiar static. By the time the begging came out of the car speakers, I was sprinting back to the parking lot at the call center. Please, help, echoed behind me. I could hear the 2 guys arguing and trying to retune the radio to get their music back, but I didn't care to hear any more. I jumped into my car, forgetting about the shift altogether, and floored it away from the call center, leaving my phone and bag at my desk. I made sure the radio in my car was off. I didn't know where to go. I didn't want to go back to my apartment, because I feared I'd hear that cursed voice coming through any speaker I had laying around in the cluttered mess of gadgets I kept laying around. I drove as fast as I could to the outskirts of town, just past the state line, until the roads became more wooded and the lights of civilization faded behind the hills. I pulled over at a gas station off the interstate and filled up. Head still spinning, I grabbed another cheap bottle of whiskey to calm myself. This wasn't an issue of cheating on my sobriety. This was a medical use to maintain my damn sanity. I pulled over on a county road and dove into the bottle. I got out and stared at the stars until the whiskey made them spin and my nerves began to cool. It was impossible. All of it. I needed to talk with my therapist. We hadn't spoken in months. I hadn't felt the need for any more support lately, but maybe I did still need help. Maybe this was the first of many delusions, and some part of me always knew I would lose it someday. The familiar feeling of hopelessness began to creep back in, but I took another drink and cut it off. I wasn't that person anymore. I'd fought hard to climb out of that hole, and I had the tools to keep myself out now. What I needed now was to sleep, and then come up with a safety plan for myself. I got back into the car and turned around, heading back home. It was a dark county road, no one around for miles. I knew I'd be sober enough by the time I got back into areas where people would be driving. I was thinking about that when my head dipped down. Thinking about how easy it would be to slip off to sleep later and wake up with a new plan, a new direction. Then I heard that sickening thump. It bounced me a few inches out of my seat, then again as it hit the rear wheel. I slammed on the brakes and came to a complete stop. The road behind me was illuminated red with my brake lights. At the edge of that hellish glow, a humanoid figure wriggled on the ground. I stared at my rearview mirror at the man I'd just run over. An elderly man wearing a blue baseball cap and an oversized jacket that was mostly torn from his broken body. His neck was twisted at an unnatural angle. The light from his shattered cell phone glinted in his pupils. Then came the moan. That soul-shattering cry of anguish. "Please, help," he spluttered through his broken trachea. My mind went blank. The clock read 2:27 a.m. My foot lifted off the pedal and his body faded into the darkness, but those two glinting eyes remained in the rearview for what seemed like miles. I don't even remember getting into bed that night, but I woke up the next morning in my apartment. An officer appeared at my door, and I was certain that they knew what I had done. But it turned out to be a wellness check from the Suicide Prevention Center after I hadn't returned for my things. I told him I was okay, just dealing with a personal crisis. The officer didn't give me any grief and filled out a quick report. A news article came out later that day in the neighboring county that one of their older residents, known for taking nocturnal walks, had been killed in a hit-and-run accident. I realized that they were in different time zones, an hour behind us. I looked at the photograph of the man, alive and smiling, thought about his kids and grandkids, thought about how long he must have laid there on the road, gasping for air, begging for help. It's been a few weeks now, and it doesn't seem to matter where I am every Wednesday morning at 1:27 a.m. Somehow, his call for help will find me, and I know there's nothing I can do now. Maybe if I hadn't been drinking, maybe if I hadn't been so damn scared of that voice, if my flight instinct hadn't kicked in, I wouldn't have just left him there. I wouldn't have ever received that call from unknown caller. If I hadn't been alive. I may never understand, but all I know now is that I can't take any more of these calls, these pleas for help. It's all I hear, and no amount of booze can drown it out. I don't think I can take it anymore. "Your job is to sell, said my new supervisor, leading me across the showroom floor. "Think you can handle that?" He turned around and looked at my plastic name tag. "Danny?" I gave a thumbs up. "Good," he snapped, then continued walking. We were on the ground floor, sandwiched between two long rows of beds. It was only 9:20 a.m, but the store was already a beehive of activity. He spoke over his shoulder as I followed him up a metal stairway, one step behind. "Sell as many mattresses as you can. That's where the profits are. If the customer, chirp, isn't biting, offer discounts. If that doesn't work, throw in some new sheets or an extra pillow. Chirp." I wanted to say something about the weird chirp sound he kept making, but I held my tongue. We reached the first floor, where the mattresses lay stacked on top of one another like playing cards. There are no breaks. You get 45 minutes for lunch. Be back on time. Chirp! Don't call in sick. Don't screw around. Don't say anything rude in front of a customer. And remember, your bonus depends on how many mattresses you sell. Nothing else counts. He paused. Am I going too fast for you? Nope, I got it, I said confidently. The storeroom is through there. He gestured towards a set of double doors marked warehouse, staff only beyond this point. Do not go back there for any reason, ever. I catch you in there, you're gone. You need something from the back, come find me. Chirp, you're paid to stand out here and sell, understand? I nodded. Probation lasts 6 months. If at any point during that time you aren't hitting your sales targets, which you probably won't, you're gone. Chirp, got a problem with that? I bit my bottom lip and shook my head. Good. Any questions? Nope. As he ticked a bunch of boxes on his clipboard, I couldn't help thinking he was one of the weirdest looking people I'd ever met. He was bald and pale, with bulbous eyes and narrow lips. Okay, your training is finished. Go sell some damn mattresses. With that, he pulled out a key card, held it up to a panel alongside the door, then disappeared. At the front side of the building, a wall of plate glass overlooked the parking lot. Tucked away in the far corner was my piece of crap car. If I hadn't needed the money so badly, I might have already handed over my name tag and told my asshole supervisor to shove it up his ass. On the ground floor, my new co-workers scrambled around, trying to make sales. I figured I'd best do the same, and so, not knowing anything about sales or beds, I made my way towards a couple arguing over headboards. Turns out, I was a natural. Before the end of my first week, I had already hit my monthly sales quota. The bonuses were insane. I made a commission on every mattress I sold, so I pushed the most expensive brands relentlessly. My co-workers couldn't understand how I did it. A little into my second week, as a wave goodbye to a family of 4 who just purchased a new set of bunk beds, a smooth voice spoke from behind. So, this is the guy? I spun around. A tall man with sharp features was standing alongside my supervisor. The guy reeked of wealth, his suit was tailored fit, and his hair perfectly groomed. He extended a hand. Pleased to meet you. My name, chirp, is Mr. Johnson. For a moment, I stood in shock. What's the matter, Danny? My supervisor snarled, gritting his teeth at me. Too much of a big shot to shake hands with the boss? I smiled and said, Pleased to meet you. Then, as an afterthought, added, Sir? Mr. Johnson's hand was so large it enveloped mine. Please, call me Frank. He threw a hand around my shoulder and guided me down one of the aisles. So, I hear you're quite the salesman. Pride swelled in my chest. I try my best. He laughed. Try? 1 week in and you were already, chirp, on course to be the top salesman for this entire quarter. I couldn't believe it when I saw the figures. I said, I've got to meet this wonder kid. I blushed, slightly embarrassed. How are you finding it here? Chirp, everything to your liking? It was a strange place. The warehouse staff gave me the creeps. They never spoke or laughed or did anything, besides chirp, that is. I still hadn't figured out what the hell was up with that. One time, 2 of them wheeled out a pallet full of mattresses for one of my orders, and I tried to start a conversation with them. They both looked at me like I just peed in their cornflakes. My co-workers were friendly enough, although we were usually all too busy trying to make sales to take much notice of each other. Yeah, I said, a slight tone of hesitation in my voice. Everything's great. The village idiot isn't giving you any problems. He subtly gestured towards my supervisor, who hovered across the way like a fly, searching for a solid landing spot on a slippery turd. Nope, I said. Good, good. Well, he gives you any problems, just remind him the salespeople are king. They're the ones who keep the lights on around here. Chirp. He turned towards me and shook my hand again. As we stood face to face, I realized Mr. Johnson was much older than I first thought. His face had that uncanny valley quality, where at a glance you think he's in his mid-30s, but upon closer inspection, you realise he's probably just got a great plastic surgeon. Keep up the good work. He winked at me and gestured towards my supervisor. A moment later, the two of them disappeared into the storeroom. The praise from Mr. Johnson was like a shot in my arm. After meeting him, I went from strength to strength. The sales bonuses rolled in. I even treated myself to a fancy new car. Soon, it was almost the end of the month. The store closed at 5 o'clock, and commission on any sales made after that wouldn't be issued until the next payroll. That was a problem. I'd had my eye on a 100-inch 4K TV and was coming up just short of the cash. I busted my ass all day, flogging as many mattresses as I could. 20 minutes before closing time, when I didn't have a second to spare, a nasally voice said, "You were 2 minutes late getting back from your lunch break yesterday." I turned to see my supervisor. "Chirp, we're not paying you to sit in the break room scratching your balls all day," he snapped. "Make sure you get back on time." As he stormed off angrily, I spotted something out of the corner of my eye. His keycard. The asshole dropped it. I slipped it in my pocket swiftly. The thought of that dick frantically searching the whole building for it gave me a feeling of great satisfaction. Just then, a heavy-set man wandered into view, a look of boredom frozen on his face. I raced towards him. "Excuse me, sir, can I—" He held up a hand. "No upselling. Just get me 6 memory foam mattresses, 2 king-sized, 1 queen, and 3 doubles." That 4K TV was as good as mine. I told the guy I'd meet him at the counter, then sprinted across the store, searching for all the products he'd mentioned. But I had a problem. They were all out of stock. Of all the rotten luck. I needed my supervisor to wrangle the warehouse guys and get the order brought out pronto. I searched the ground floor. No sign of him. I covered the first floor, the bathroom and break room. Still nothing. Where was that asshole? All of a sudden, I had an idea. I still had his keycard. I'd no doubt feel his righteous wrath for setting foot in the forbidden warehouse, but I'd also have a fat payslip to help soften the blow. I rushed towards the double doors, where I held his card against the wall panel. A red light blinked green. Then the door opened. A short hallway led me to the main warehouse, where rows of shelving units stretched towards the ceiling. I checked my watch. 10 minutes until closing. Across the bay, a man wearing a blue jumpsuit was loading boxes onto a metal pallet, his back to me. "Hey," I shouted, racing towards him. He either didn't hear me or pretended not to. When I reached the other side of the bay, I poked him on the shoulder. "Hey, where do you keep the—" He spun around so fast, it made me jump. Hi." He took a step forward and tilted his head to the side, eyes wide. "Chirp. Look, I know I'm not supposed—" Chirp. Another step. I moved backward. "Hey, I need you to get me—" It was then that I heard footsteps echoing through the bay and noticed more men in jumpsuits heading directly for me. I had the distinct impression they weren't there to help me. They weren't there to help me find what I was looking for. I threw my hands up. "Everything's cool. I just need some mattresses. Could you maybe bring some out to the storefront?" The men spread out into a semicircle surrounding me, periodically chirping. "You know what? I actually think I saw some out front earlier. I'll just go double check." 2 of the men pushed their shoulders together, blocking my escape. The entire group closed in on me, huddled in a tight circle. "Guys, come on, I've got a customer waiting." One of them grabbed my collar from behind. I pulled away. "What the hell?" As I spun to face him, someone else grabbed my arm. I wrestled it free. "Seriously, cut it out." They kept moving forward. Now, I'd barely enough space to move. As the first man reached towards me, I grabbed him by the head and shoved him away. "Get lost! Go away!" The others stopped moving. The man stood motionless for a second, his head tilted away. Then he slowly turned back towards me. A rubber mask sat askew on his head, and a giant mandible, the kind you'd see on an ant, was sticking out from his mouth. I froze in horror. The mandible wriggled back and forth, chirping rapidly. I spun around and tried to force my way through the crowd, but then they piled on top of me. All at once they reached out and grabbed my head, until all I could see was blackness. I woke up, strapped to a wheelchair. Mr. Johnson was sitting on a nearby table, like a teacher waiting to tell his students he was disappointed with their test results. "Ah, you're awake. Hope your head doesn't sting too badly. I'd heard the boys were a bit rough on you. Chirp." I noticed a dull throb on the back of my skull. What the hell is going on? I'm sorry about all of this, Danny. I really, am. I'd have preferred you stay out of this whole mess. I raised my voice. You better let me out of this chair, or I'll... Or you'll what? Said a whiny, familiar voice. My supervisor walked into my field of vision, staring at me with contempt. When I tried, and failed to lunge at him, he smirked. Mr. Johnson put up his hands. Easy, easy. We're all friends here. Nobody has to get hurt. I started queasing. I looked up at my supervisor, then Mr. Johnson. What the hell is going on? Why am I strapped to this chair? And what the hell is wrong with the guy's mouth? Mr. Johnson sighed. Danny, let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered how we can afford to sell our mattresses so cheap? What does that have to do with anything? It'll all become clear in a second. Didn't it ever strike you as odd that there are 4 mattress stores for every 10 people in this city? I hesitated. Isn't it peculiar that so many could stay in business? I don't care. Just let me out of this chair. Mr. Johnson gestured towards my supervisor. I felt a kick, hard enough to bang my head against the headboard. Then they wheeled me through the warehouse. Men in jumpsuits drove forklifts around and loaded pallets, occasionally chirping as they worked. I recognized some of them from earlier. We stopped alongside 2 men making a long incision in a mattress. Mr. Johnson motioned towards the men as if to say, "Watch this." Something scuttled around behind my chair, close to the floor. It scurried over the top of my feet, towards the mattress. I tensed up. It was something like a millipede, only 5 foot long and thicker than my damn thigh. I thrashed around and yelped like a 10-year-old girl. My supervisor chuckled. The thing crawled into the mattress, then wriggled its way through the narrow slit. I was panting now. I don't understand. You will. We continued to the warehouse. You see, Danny, Mr. Johnson said, my species are what you might call a parasite, at least in a larvae state, and we rely on human hosts to incubate our young. I looked at him, astonished. Your species? Mr. Johnson turned towards my supervisor. Show him. My supervisor stopped pushing the chair and walked in front of me. There, he grabbed a handful of skin and pulled his face up. His entire skull was actually a rubber mask, beneath which sat a black, hairy insect head with long mandibles and bulbous green eyes. I shrieked, trying to rock myself out of the chair. He leaned in close and clicked his mandibles together, releasing a constant chirping. Cold, foul-smelling liquid leaked from his long mouth and into my lap. I turned away and pressed my eyelids together. This isn't happening. This isn't happening. My supervisor laughed, then pulled his mask down, adjusting it until his face looked normal. Mr. Johnson put a hand on my shoulder. As you can imagine, humans are squeamish about playing host to a parasite, so we have to be careful. If humans actually knew they were incubators, he thought for a moment, well, there's no telling what they'd do. That presented us with a problem. We had to figure out how to implant our eggs without the humans realizing. So we hatched the plan, Danny. A genius way to sneak into the homes of every last man, woman and child on planet Earth. Can you guess how we did it? By now, the millipede thing had disappeared inside the mattress. The men in front of us sealed it up and loaded it onto a pallet. Then they got to work on a second. Mattresses. Mr. Johnson nodded. That's why there are so many mattress stores, Danny. That's why we can sell them so cheap. Making money was never our goal. Across the globe, countless stores are packing up our females and distributing them to unsuspecting humans. In the continental United States alone, we have 4,000 stores selling 8 million mattresses every year. It's an ingenious system. After the humans fall asleep, the females slip their ovipositor tube through the mattress and implant the eggs. The tube administers a numbing gel that helps the humans get the best night's sleep of their life. The eggs get a surrogate. The female can stay close to monitor the development. And, if we're lucky, the unsuspecting human recommends our mattresses to their friends, perpetuating the cycle. We came to a stop in front of a glass wall that stretched from the floor to the ceiling. Behind the glass stood a naked man. It must have been a two-way mirror, because he didn't react to us. My supervisor parked my chair, then pushed buttons on a wall panel. The eggs can incubate indefinitely, Mr. Johnson continued. They won't hatch until subjected to a specific high-pitched frequency. Behind the glass, that sound must have started playing through a speaker, because the man pushed both his hands against his ears. A moment later, bumps rose and fell beneath his skin. I felt the blood pumping in the soles of my feet. My supervisor disappeared behind my chair. We're playing the long game here, Danny. We've already implanted our young into 36% of your species. As we speak, millions of them are lying in bed, perhaps browsing social media on their phones or laptops, separated from us by just a few inches of fabric. A hole tore open in the man's skin as a grub ate its way out of him. It was fat and ribbed and stained in the man's blood. More holes opened up in his head and his chest and his arms. The grubs swarmed all over him, covering him like a pattern of spots, biting off chunks of flesh. I could only watch in horror. Clutching my right bicep with his enormous hand, Mr. Johnson kneeled beside me. But there's still work left to do. And that's where you come in. See, we're already in the final stretch, and we need to get as many humans implanted as possible before we execute the trigger. We need salesmen, Danny. Good salesmen. I'm making you an offer. Join us, sell our mattresses, help us accomplish our mission. In exchange, I'll spare you from... He gestured towards the window, where the man screamed silently. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain composure. This is insane. Chirp. What's it going to be, Danny? I laughed hysterically. What's it going to be? How about this? Go screw yourself. He sighed. I'm sorry it had to be this way. He nodded past my shoulder. A moment later, my supervisor wandered back into view, carrying one of the horrible millipede monsters in his arms. He petted its head, then extended it towards me. I gasped. Okay, I'll sell. Just don't put those damn eggs in me. I looked up at Mr. Johnson, tears in my eyes. Please, I'll do anything. The thing scurried into my lap. I felt its weight against my thighs and tensed up. It lifted the front third of its body and looked at me. It opened its mouth. Then a white tube drooped over its chin. Slowly, the tube extended, like a deflated balloon taken in air. Mr. Johnson folded his arms behind my back. Here's what's going to happen. This female will lay her eggs inside of you. The toxins will give you a good night's sleep. Then you'll wake up tomorrow morning in your own bed, feeling calm and well rested. The sting went in. The puncture was painless, almost pleasant. The thing contracted, forcing the eggs from her body into mine. Monday morning, you're going to turn up as per usual and sell. If you act like everything is normal and don't breathe a word about this to anyone, I'll remove the eggs before my species execute the trigger. I promise. refuse, and, well, he gestured towards the window where the man had become a human apple core. First thing I do when I get out of here is going straight to the damn police, I growled. My supervisor threw his head back and laughed. The police? We own the police. I felt rhythmic pulsations going into my stomach and bit my bottom lip. Then I'll go to a doctor and get these things extracted. I'll put them on display for the whole world to see. He slapped me gently. Oh sure, doctor help me, I've got bugs growing inside of me and I need to get them cut out. You'll spend the next 6 months in a padded cell knowing the trigger could come at any second. Then I'll do it myself. I'll post it on Facebook or... Mr. Johnson put a hand on my supervisor's shoulder and pulled him back. Then he smiled at me sympathetically. Look, I'm sorry, Danny, but humanity has already lost. Soon the bedbugs will inherit the earth. This was decided long ago, but it's not too late to get on the winning team. My eyelids became heavy as my head drooped towards my chest. He patted me on the back. Just think about it, okay? The last thing I remember is the unsettling chirps fading into the distance. I grew up in Pasadena, California, back in the 1980s. My father often worked late as a construction worker to provide for us, leaving me home alone from the age of 8, leading up to when I moved out at 22. My father never asked much of me. He let me wear whatever I wanted, especially through multiple phases. He let me smoke weed at 16, bought me alcohol for parties, but he always had one strict rule: never go near the gates of hell. I didn't think that applied to me now that I'm 42. The gates of hell, or more commonly known as the Devil Gates Dam, had gotten its name from locals due to the natural forming of a horned devil's face in the rock of the dam. It had been named long before my time, and its stories whispered before even my father was born. Although he never spared me the details, my childhood friends Mark and Patrick told me tales of cults and rituals, mainly performed by some sort of scientist and founder of a lab called JPL, or at least that's what I can pull from my memory. In 1989, I remember talk of children going missing around the gate, mostly teenagers, but there was one, age 11, just like me, who'd wandered down to the dam and never returned. My father stayed home for a few days when that happened. I didn't think it back then, but now that I look back, perhaps he was making sure my curiosity didn't get the better of me. And I think if he hadn't been there, I would have gone. The gates have been closed ever since, or at least that is what I heard from my friends who frequently visited. So when I headed back to my childhood home following my father's passing, the last thing on my mind was some dumb dam of hell. For the first few days of being in Pasadena, I spent a majority of my time listing my father's furniture on Facebook Marketplace. I had considered donating it, but he insisted in his will that I get as much money from this situation as I could. He had also made a request that I burn the contents of the large maroon box which sat on the highest shelf of his wardrobe. I remember the same box being heavily guarded by him during my childhood, but I'd been too scared to look inside, despite feeling a draw to it. On day 5, I pulled down the box. A thick layer of dust coated the lid, but the contents inside seemed to be frozen in time. The box mainly contained pictures of my mother. She was an avid explorer, a secret my dad kept quiet until our heart-to-heart talk over the phone when I was 39. I scattered the pictures across the floor according to the dates. From the look of the film, they had definitely been taken on disposable cameras. There were a few pictures of my father too, but never a photo of them together, indicating they were the only two on these adventures. On the back listed multiple places within California and some of the surrounding states. Caves, forests, dams, and abandoned buildings sat in the background of each one, until I got to the final one, dating back to just a year after my birth, around the time she had died. And that's when I saw it. The gates of hell. I had never been there personally, but curiosity had gotten the better of me during my adulthood, and I'll admit to Googling it once or twice, but it was just to fill the curiosity that stemmed from my childhood. It was definitely it. It's hard to describe my shock. It felt as if my whole body had grown cold. I had been told my mother died in a car accident when I was younger, but with my dad's strong-mindedness towards the Devil's Gate, I couldn't help feel as if they were connected, so I continued to look. First, I pulled out VHS tapes. Many of them had titles to match the other photos, until I came across Devil's Gate, written in my father's sloppy handwriting. I was lucky that nobody had stepped forward for the dated VHS player and TV my dad had kept over the decades, as I was able to hook them up and play the VHS almost straight away. The tape was underwhelming, in a sense that nothing happened. What was exciting was seeing my mother in action. Although the quality was awful, I was still able to make out her features and see her as a person, rather than a still image. I teared up. She was beautiful. God knows how my father got her, but I could tell my dad didn't like these adventures. He did it for her smile. I would too. The video didn't have much to it. They walked around a fence, down the ladder, and stood in front of the gate. It was locked. My mother was disappointed and wanted to climb to the top where there was a small gap. My father wasn't too keen on the idea and offered her a simple, "We'll just tell people we went in." And then the video ended. I replayed the video multiple times. It felt unreal to see my mother like that. I had no memories of her, but I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed and miss her. That night, I went to sleep in my father's bed, emotional, feeling like a little boy that had crawled into his parents' bed during a thunderstorm. The next day, I remembered the box. I had been so worn out emotionally from seeing my mother that I had completely forgotten about it. I had debated watching the VHS again, but figured it would be unhealthy. I pulled out a slip of paper. Compared to the rest of the stuff in this box, this folded up, lined paper had been touched a lot. I could tell by the deepness of the crease and the floppiness of the paper. I opened it up. The handwriting wasn't my father's. "Dear James, I can't stop thinking about the gate. I won't be able to rest until I go in. George will need his diaper changed when you wake up. There's some food in the fridge for the both of you if I'm not back by then. Yours, Grace." The paper, I now realized to be stained with tears, sat in my hands while the rest of me remained in still silence. The need to know more overcame me, and I found myself searching through the box for more clues. Newspaper cuttings of my mother's missing notices were packed neatly in the box, as well as letters my father had written to my mother despite her disappearance. What was so special about the Devil's Gate that she had to go that night? I spent the day processing it. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted to go see the dam for myself. So I called up Mark and Patrick, who at first needed some convincing, and soon I was prepared to go visit it with them. I packed some items such as flashlights, emergency flares, a Swiss Army knife, as well as non-perishable foods. Patrick and Mark didn't show up nearly as prepared, claiming they went there as children and it really wasn't a big deal. They showed me the way. It wasn't easy to get to the Devil's Gate. Perhaps if I was as agile as I was as a child, I would be able to. Our journey started in Hahamongna Park, which sits just on the border of La Canada Flint Ridge. I'd gone there on walks with my father a few times. Its trails were fairly known, but we'd never gone close to the side that met the highway. We took the way that father never took me, over a concrete bridge which had an S-shaped bend to it. We'd gotten lost at first by taking the tunnel before the bridge. You have to take the tunnel after the bridge. Mark and Patrick laughed it off, claiming that their memory of the place wasn't the greatest. We then ended up in a wooded area again, but this time the path was lined with rocks, making it difficult to walk steadily. "There it is!" Mark shouted. He pointed ahead to the exact rock that gave the dam its name. It hardly looked like a face, but I could see the resemblance. "Damn!" exclaimed Patrick. He was just a few paces ahead of Mark at that point, but came to a stop. "The water! I forgot about the damn water!" Sat between us was a murky green type of pond. Cans, bottles and debris from trees floated on the surface, breaking the algae-like surface that blanketed the liquid. "It doesn't look too deep," I commented. Patrick picked up one of the floating sticks and jabbed it through the water's surface. It had to have gone a good 3 or 4 feet before he stopped. "It goes deeper than that," he said. We stood around for a few moments, and I recalled the video I had watched 2 days prior. My mother never walked straight to the gate. They went down a ladder. "Isn't there some sort of ladder around here?" I asked the two. Mark almost jumped to the comment. "The ladder! I can't believe we forgot." Everything still looked the same as the VHS footage. The gate to the ladder was locked, but the vents didn't travel far and was easy to walk around. We travelled down the ladder and to the gate to find it locked. The two men huffed in annoyance, frustrated that it was closed. "It's been locked since the 80s, Mark complained. I brought my face up to the bars. The cool metal stung the side of my face, and I looked on into the darkness. I was only able to see a good 10 feet worth of graffiti before the rest of the dam disappeared into the void. "Well, I guess that's as far as we go," Patrick shrugged. I continued to look into the darkness. Did my mother really go in there? I took a quick look at the top of the gate. There was definitely space to fit if you crawled up there. Even one of the bars were bent out of place, perfect for a human to squeeze through. "George?" I turned around to the two, expecting a follow-up to my name, but they had been stuck in a conversation. "George?" the feminine voice echoed. It was coming from inside. "Do you guys hear that?" I asked aloud, putting a halt to their conversation. They both approached the gate, not willing to press their faces to the dirted bars like me. Silence. I felt like a fool. "Should we go for a few drinks and catch up?" suggested Patrick. We agreed. The entire night, I couldn't get the gate out of my head. The echoing of a female voice remained present in my mind on repeat, almost as clear as when I first heard it. Mark and Patrick had done well for themselves. They both had families they showed off proudly and full-time jobs that were respectful. I wasn't envious though. I had lived my life in comfort. Not having to worry about somebody else's needs meant that I could live happily, and how I wanted. We had been drinking in the bar for about 3 hours now. It was 9:32 p.m. "Well, I think that's me for tonight, fellas. I have to pack up the rest of my old man's things tomorrow." I excused myself and returned back to my father's house. I debated burning the contents of the box, like my father said, but I desperately wanted to keep the VHSs, just as a memory. I placed a different VHS into the player this time. The camera was on my mother again, as she stood in front of a cave. Like the gate, it was also heavily graffitied. My mother was also very visibly pregnant. My father warned her to be careful, to which she responded with a carefree, "Little George will be fine." It was me. George. The voice rang through my head again, but this time it was clear, as if someone was actually saying it. "George, come back." I heard it once again. The more I heard the voice, the more I recognized it to be my mother's. "I'm stuck in the gate. Please." I didn't hesitate. I put on my running shoes and grabbed a flashlight from my backpack from earlier and sprinted down there. I didn't bother going to the ladder. Instead, I attempted to jump a clearing of the pond to the small island between it. I had made the first jump, but the second was miscalculated. While most of my body had landed flat on the concrete, my legs were sunk into the water. And then I saw it. The gates of hell. They were open. I scrambled to my feet. "George," my mother called, her voice coated with desperation. "I'm coming, Mother," I called back. The flashlight had gotten wet during the jump and flicked occasionally, but still shone as bright. But despite the bright beam, just like earlier, I could only see 10 feet ahead. I walked past the gate. My own footsteps sounded like a giant's due to the echo of the tunnel. "Over here," she called weakly. I sped up as fast as I could, with my now wet jeans chafing me. The cool air drifted through the tunnel and attacked my drenched lower body. "You're nearly here, baby. I can see the light." I felt comfort in her voice. I could almost picture hugging her, the warmth of a hug taking away the cold that bit away at my legs and toes. My flashlight caught a silhouette of something huddled up into a ball. Long, wet hair covered the majority of the figure. "Mother?" I called. My flashlight flickered, and I could have sworn I saw her body twist and contort for the split second. But as soon as it turned back on, I saw she was still rolled up. "I'm so cold," she whimpered. "Come warm Mummy up." She didn't move from the spot she was in, most likely conserving energy, I thought. "If I knew you were in trouble, I would have brought my bag. I have food and a thermal blanket," I blabbered. She didn't respond though. Eventually, I approached her. The fact we were basically strangers, despite her birthing me, made some awkwardness in my movement. "I'm so cold," she wept. I sat down beside her. The flashlight faced the wall in front of us, rather than on us. She'd been down here a long time. I didn't want to blind her. But oh God, the stench. She stunk like rotten meat, as if she'd been rolling it every day of the week. When I embraced her, she felt strange, slimy, like the surface of the water outside. I'd figured since she'd been stuck down here, she wasn't able to wash, so she must have been full of algae, and when I completely wrapped my arms around her, she felt like bones. "Let's get out of here. You need to go to the hospital," I whispered. "No," she screeched. Her voice almost ruptured my eardrums. I jumped back in shock. I was not used to hearing her like this. "Mother, you're all bones. You're bound to be dehydrated and malnourished. I'll pay for the hospital bill." "Stay with me, George," she demanded, her voice warm but stern. I couldn't take the stench much longer. She had to weigh like 70 pounds from the feel of her. I thought I could easily carry her out of here. I turned the flashlight over towards her. She was so dirty that what was left of her skin looked grey. "Stay with me, George. Stay with Mummy. We'll be happy here. I only need you. I knew I only needed you when I gave birth to you," she rambled on. I didn't listen. I turned her over. It took me a minute to get a good look at her, as my body blocked the light source, but when I shifted my head, the light shone perfectly on her face. She was just bones. Patches of skin hugged onto her skeleton, while her eyes were clouded. Bone poked through her arms, and I could have sworn she was more bone than skin. And her hair. It was thin, matted, and most of it sat on her shoulders as if it had fallen out. "Don't you want to live with Mummy?" she asked. She had noticed, somehow, my sudden disgust through those glazed eyes. I tried to back away, but her bony fingers gripped under my forearm so tight it felt as if she could have broken the bone. "I've been waiting for you, George," she continued. Whatever that thing was, she wasn't my mother. "You can be like me. We just have to go see him. He'll be happy I brought you," she called out in desperation. I tried to wiggle from her grip, but I gained nothing from it. "He's been waiting. I told him about you. He was waiting for me. Now he's waiting for you," she continued to ramble, her grip tightened. "You're hurting me," I screamed, the grip so tight the blood stopped flowing to my hand. "You can't keep him waiting," she shouted over me. I grabbed the flashlight and slammed it against the center of her forearm. It smashed through a bone, and she let out an ungodly shriek, and then I ran. The way out seemed much longer than the way in. I ran while she shrieked behind me. Light and wet footsteps paddled on behind me. But once I got out of the gate, the noise disappeared. She didn't come into the view of the first 10 feet of the gate. I waited. The walk home was unsettling. I didn't sleep for the next few days. Instead, I packed all of my father's things away, and on the final day, I made a large fire in his backyard and burnt the contents of the maroon box, including every single VHS, with the exception of the Devil's Gate. I have the urge to visit Mother again, this time prepared to take her out of there. Yet, at the same time, I know it's not her. It would just be nice, but for now, I have to travel home from work. I went back to the gates of hell in Pasadena, California, and the gates are open. Something pretending to be my mother tried to trick me into staying. And now, I'm curious about what I missed out on.